and Cora, let me know when I can kick off because I didn't download GoToMeeting. I'm using it via the web, and so I actually can't see. The only thing I can see is my presentation. So I just want to make sure, you know, it's okay when I start because the majority of the people are on the call.
You got it. See that there's at least 7 of us on.
Great. Okay, so is it your take I can get going?
I think, Cora, do you know how many people said they were going to be on?
I cannot think of anybody else that we are waiting on except possibly Bonnie. I don't think she's on the call or on the meeting yet.
I'd say we can go then.
Okay, great. Okay. Hey, everybody. Thank you very, very much for giving me this opportunity to talk to you this afternoon. Just for a little bit of a backstory, in 2016, the Koshas formalized their giving efforts and they established their family foundation. And the mission of the foundation is to see the state receive or be at least a 90% live release rate for healthy and treatable animals and to reduce overpopulation. And we wanted to build on the work of the landscape analysis and take it, you know, to a more granular level. And so that was the impetus for collecting the data. So that we wanted to use, we wanted to identify, you know, communities and species at risk and then use facts to identify and prioritize our funding strategies. So this presentation is about 20 to 25 minutes, and because of the nature of the setup here, I'll pause after slides, and if you have a question, let me know. Otherwise, we'll just take them at the end. Okay. So I promise I won't be reading every slide, but the first few have a lot of information. In terms of the data collection, we received data from 121 organizations submitting their 2015 data, and they were shelters and rescues. There were 39 municipal shelters and/or humane societies with contracts and 28 rescues, and it represented 34 counties. And then we also had low-cost spay-neuter providers, and there were 54 organizations that submitted information, some of them with multiple delivery mechanisms. So what did we learn? The first thing we learned was that data is mandatory, but qualitative information is important too. And you'll really see this when we start looking at the heat maps pertaining to the live release rate and the intake per 1,000. We also learned that it was important to separate rescue data from municipal shelter/humane society with contracts data. I did not know that at first. Maybe that would be obvious to all of you. I thought, oh, we need to look at the numbers in aggregate. And what I realized is that rescues, for the most part, are not euthanizing animals. And so if we really want to focus on reducing euthanasia, we needed to look at those numbers separately. The next thing was that rescues play a significant role in the state. They handled 14% of the total statewide intake, and 65% of the animals that they took in were cats. And we also learned that they provide significant or all sheltering and adoption services in 9 counties. Also, that cats fare worse than dogs. I have a feeling all of you probably knew that, but again, we're approaching this from a funding perspective, not an agency operator perspective. And the Koshas came to this work via their love of dogs. So when we started to look at the data and we realized, wow, it's really cats that are the ones in trouble, that was an eye-opener for us. So in Washington, there are 10 counties with less than an 80% live release rate for cats in comparison to only 1 for dogs. And there are 8 counties with minimal or no services for cats. This is obvious. Access to low-cost spay-neuter is limited, but we were able to identify the 9 counties with minimal or no low-cost spay-neuter services. And if I'm going too fast or anyone has a question, let me know. Okay, we also learned that there was a lack of county animal control in 9 counties. And in addition, there's another 1 or 2 that has a county animal control officer, but they don't respond to companion animal issues. So the overarching things we learned was that the majority of issues impact the same counties and the same regions over and over again. And that is the coastal, north central, northeast, south central, and then Lewis and Adams County. And what I'll say as I go through the presentation, you'll see me referring to these regions over and over again. And it's not because I don't think that maybe there are opportunities to do some different things in the North and South Puget Sound, maybe around like breed-specific legislation. But for the most part, the live release rate in the North and South Puget Sound is outstanding. So, you know, it's something that we're thinking about, but it may not be addressed here in this presentation. Okay, so now I'm going to provide just some top-level information about intake and outcomes. So based on the 2015 data from that were euthanized, almost 78% of them were euthanized in municipal shelters or humane societies with minimal or no community cat programs. And that, you know, that was very interesting to us.
Hey, Janine, this is Kay, and I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
There was a message at the top saying that you were having technical difficulties, and if it didn't get resolved, that the session would end in 5 minutes. If for some reason that does occur, we'll just wait for you to get back on. Is that good?
That's fine. And is it saying that mine is having technical difficulties?
It said the organizer, so it's either you or Corey.
%83% live release rate. Dogs were at almost 89%, and cats were at 77%. And you'll have to indulge the one cat image in the presentation. So before I go into the actual heat maps, I just want to point out a few things. Yes? Okay. I want to point out a few things that should be considered about the data. First of all, the accuracy. I did my absolute best to review and clean the data before I input it. But there definitely are a couple of instances where I think it could be squishy. Next, improved live release rates. This data is from 2015, and it's now Q3 of 2017. So I really want to just remind everyone, let's use this as a baseline, especially when we're looking at live release rates by county. Also, how ORE impacts live release rates. In counties where it was significant, I've called that out, and I've provided the LRR both with and without it. The other thing is the importance of rescue data. Again, you know, because we separated it out, there are instances throughout the state where their intake accounts for a significant, if not greater, intake than the municipal shelter and humane societies intake. And you know, it's not represented visually, so we need to provide that contextual information. And also, if they're providing the only service in the county. And then finally, intake per 1,000. There's a couple of instances where I think that I found it to be very interesting just how many animals certain counties were handling. And then finally, this information is being reported out by county. So in some instances, a county may only have one shelter. And in another instance, they may have 3 shelters. And again, you're going to just see information by county, not shelter. Okay, so we're going to start with the dog live release rate. Great, almost 89%. This was amazing. But there's definitely a few things we need to point out about this map. First of all, the Northeast, Okanogan and Stevens County specifically. This is very misleading because I only received data from one animal control officer in Okanogan County, which is on the Colville Native American Reservation, and she only handled 34 dogs. So you're looking at that and you're like, wow, that's really great. But the rescues in that county handled over 900 dogs. So just something to point out. And also, several of the other animal control officers opted not to participate, and I do know that one of them is euthanizing animals and not in the most humane way. Similar with Stevens, the animal control officer handled 90 dogs, and I know the rescue out there is handling over 200. So just some things to note. Thurston County, I also want to point out, the way their live release rate is represented here, it's at 69%, but ORE really impacts them, and so when I exclude that, their live release rate for dogs is at 83%. And then I also want to point out on the coastal region, specifically Clallam County, rescues really provide a lot of services out on the west end. Are at 74%. The same with Spokane. In Spokane, there are 3 shelters represented there, and one of the shelters does a lot of ORE, so it's skewing that number. And then also in Jefferson County, and this is kind of a weird situation, they're showing it 66%, but if you take out the ORE, their cat live release rate is 96%, and that seems a little bit, I'm not too confident about that, so I've got to look into that. I want to point out Clallam County here. Yes, the Olympic Peninsula Humane Society is doing incredible work, but the rescues in that county are handling 24% of the total cat intake for the county. And then we're going to just run down to Franklin County. That county is showing as a 37% live release rate for cats, and that is a legitimate number. So almost all of the community cats that enter are euthanized, but even more than that, healthy cats that enter that shelter get sick and don't make it out alive. So that's really an area that needs some help and some focus. And for me, as the person who is like looking at and analyzing the data, I actually found this slide, I felt very discouraged at first, like, wow, I couldn't believe how many cats were being euthanized. But the second slide, the next slide, made me feel somewhat more optimistic. And that's because we put bubbles of communities actually performing TNR over the live release rates. And so when I look at this, there's only one county, which is Chelan, that in 2015 was doing some type of TNR and they have, you know, a live release rate for cats that needs to be improved. And so I kind of took this as an optimistic slide, because I thought to myself, you know, if in fact more communities were implementing community cat programs, there would be a tremendous opportunity to increase the live release rates for cats in the state. This slide here, which is cat and dog LRR, is really just meant to be a baseline. Again, you know, ORE impacts some counties, so I feel like it's important to mention that. Improvements have been made since this 2015 data, and then also, you know, because rescue data isn't included, it can kind of skew what's actually happening within the state. So now we're going to look at intake per 1,000. The first thing right off the bat that I thought was interesting is Chelan has the highest cat intake at 28.1 cats per 1,000, and the second highest for dogs at 28.1 also. In Spokane, you know, so Spokane is the second largest city, the fourth most populous county, and their intake per 1,000 for cat and dogs is significantly higher than other metropolitan areas like King and Pierce. So I just thought that was something interesting to note, that they're handling a lot more animals and most probably with less resources. And then also, I don't know if Sarah Archer is on the phone. And Sarah, if you are, you may know this already, but Walla Walla actually had the second highest intake for cats at 19.4 cats per 1,000, and the third highest for dogs at 19.5. Cat intake per 1,000. I definitely think that this slide can be somewhat misleading because the rescue data isn't included. And so specifically in Grays Harbor and in Benton, in Grays Harbor, the rescues are handling 79% of the total county cat intake. That's a lot. And the same is true in Benton County. Benton Franklin Humane is handling 87% of the county's total cat intake. And there really are very minimal resources for cats. And philosophically, the municipal agencies, I can't say across the board don't think it matters, but there's this underlying sense that maybe they're not as important. So I'm going to show you now a dog intake per 1,000 and then a stray dog intake per 1,000, which I thought was really interesting. The first thing to notice here is Adams County. This is one of the instances where I wasn't 100% confident in the data, and so their intake per 1,000 for dogs is showing up as 39.7. I do think they have a high intake per 1,000 for dogs for sure. I just don't know if it's that high. And again, Okanagan and Stevens County would in fact look different in terms of the intake per 1,000 if we were including rescue data. So this is the stray dog intake, and I'm just going to back up, show you the dog intake per 1,000 and then the stray dog intake per 1,000. And so when we were visiting shelters in 2014, we were being told about issues related to migrant workers leaving the community. And I'm not saying that this is proof positive or conclusive evidence of that, but I am saying it is interesting. And I would love to be able to talk to the shelter directors in those communities to look at data by month, because I don't have that information, and to see when the intake is increasing and what that correlates to. And finally, before I leave the shelter side of things, I just want to point out the role of rescue organizations in the state. I can't stress enough how they are kind of shouldering the burden in the coastal region and the northeast and north central part of the state, and also in Benton County. And the coastal areas, in some instances, they're handling 60% of the total county intake. They provide the primary services for cats, And again, in Clallam, they're critical on the West End, and there's this one small organization called Friends of Forks Animals that has a very, very good relationship with the La Push Reservation, and they're making a big difference out there. And I don't know that if those groups weren't out there kind of really hustling, that would be the case. Same with the Northeast and the North Central. I've said this before, but in Okanagan, Ferry, and Stevens County, it's the rescues that are making things happen there. This is my favorite slide. Low-cost spay-neuter provider and locations by type. And I'll say that one of the first things is when you look at the upper right-hand corner of the map, you might think, wow, there's a lot of resources, and that's not exactly the case. In Stevens County, the red dots represent MASH units, and that is Stevens County Cat Care, and they do in fact conduct MASH units once a month for cats. The other two red dots, one in Ferry, one in Okanagan, that represents the HSUF RAVS unit, and I am a huge fan of that RAVS unit, but they only come out there once a year. So they provide an incredible resource, and it's not only low-cost spay-neuter, it's wellness care as well, but they're only out there once a year. In terms of if you go over to the coastal area, and you look at Clallam County and that purple dot, that is the mobile unit, which is Spay to Save, and they're providing incredible resources to the people who own pets on the Native American reservations out there. And then finally, oh, also I should mention in Grays Harbor, you see a red dot there. That's also the HSUS RAVS unit. They come to 2 places in Washington State, and again, that's just once a year. But when you look at, you know, Grays Harbor, Pacific, Lewis County, you know, there really isn't a lot happening out there. And I do know that Northwest Spay-Neuter, I believe, has transports out to Grays Harbor and maybe even to Pacific once a month or something like that. But again, when I was talking to all of the people, it's not, they need more, you know, yeah, they need more. And then finally, I'll just add that in Lewis County, which Lewis County has a high cat euthanasia rate, there is one group out there, it's called the Cats Meow, and they are doing TNR, but I have no idea if it's targeted, and I have no idea if it's having an impact on Lewis County's intake. And you know, that's just a whole bigger discussion about why data is so important. And the final thing I'll say on this slide, which is very exciting, is that in 2016, we would have a new green dot, which is for Yakima Humane's new low-cost clinic. We're really excited about that. I have no idea if this slide is helpful to any of you. I personally like this slide. It allows me to look at things by county, the names of the providers, the types of services, and then also the number of surgeries. And I should add that pretty much for any slide you've seen today, I have things broken down by species. So this is just, you know, the total numbers, but if you were interested in a cat or dog, I can provide that. And I have so many more slides than this. But I wanted to provide a kind of a top level and jumping off point for our discussion so that you had a sense of what was happening in the state. Okay, aiming for a 90% statewide live release rate. From the data and my conversations, one of the very first things that needs to happen is we need to implement community cat programs, including RTF and TNR. I'm not saying that's easy, and I'm not even saying that I know exactly how to make that happen, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. But in order to increase the live release rate for cats, that needs to happen. The second thing is to provide access to low-cost spay-neuter services. That's obvious, yes. You know, but it's very tricky because in some instances, it's not just a matter of funding. In some instances, there's no infrastructure, there's no owner-operator. You know, so it becomes complex. We know we have to do it, but actually, how do we do it? The next, incentivize uniform statewide data collection. I'll be interested to hear your feedback on this. I feel very strongly about this, especially after going through this process, because it was obvious that there are some agencies that are collecting data, very thoroughly, and then there are other instances where they had never heard of shelter animals count before. So I have found that collecting and analyzing the data has been instrumental in, educating Cindy and Hans, and anyone else who will listen to us about what is happening in the state, and then helping us prioritize how we want to give away our money, their money. Creating and enhancing relocation and transport partnerships. I know for the most part, there's already so much of this going on, so that, that's wonderful. But what I'm talking about is, in some instances, there are these rescues that are moving through a lot of animals, but they don't know about receiving shelters, or they don't have the chutzpah to contact them. They're kind of sitting over there waiting for something to happen. And so there's an opportunity, I think, to connect some of our shelters here that are doing incredible work with some of these kind of off the grid or off the radar entities really helping animals. This is something I definitely want your feedback on. Develop a technology solution to animal inventory management. This is something that Hans and Cindy are very wed to, and I'm not exactly sure that I feel the same way. And so I think it'll be important to hear from you, who actually, run shelters and handle transport, whether or not you think that something like this is necessary or feasible. Because I hearken back to the ASPCA MAP program, and I know it had some, kind of problems really taking hold. And then finally, public policy. I'm bringing this up because we, as a funding agency, I think are in a little bit of a different position than maybe some of the animal welfare groups. When I think about in Grays Harbor, and I think about how they've talked to their city council and their mayor, and nothing seems to get done. But we have an opportunity as a funder to say, we've looked at statewide data. We know these are what the issues are. We're willing to put resources into your community. How are you going to help us? And what's nice is that some of these smaller communities are already starting to lay the groundwork for me and anybody else who wants to come along. That's an invitation to any of you to start having conversations with people about really how can they change their animal welfare policies in their communities. So where do we go now? So first and foremost, we need to collaborate with subject matter experts to create solutions. And I've said this, I think, before, we're approaching this from a funding perspective. And we have ideas about things that would make a difference. But I think it's so important that we receive buy-in from people actually doing the work and leverage knowledge about what will work. So, I mean, some of the things I've been thinking about is, do we create a task force made up of Federation members to address the complexities in certain communities? For an example, when I think about the northeast part of the state, and it's obvious they need access to low-cost spay-neuter. And so the foundation was actually considering purchasing a mobile unit. Well, what I'm trying to explain to the trustees is that, well, we could buy the mobile unit, but we don't have anybody to run the mobile unit. There's nobody to do the community outreach. Who's going to hire the veterinarians? There's all of this stuff that needs to happen that just money isn't going to solve that problem. So if it's engaging the Federation to create a task force, if it's bringing in an outside consultant like Target Zero, who's been having incredible success in certain cities in the country, but obviously we need to get subject matter experts involved in our efforts. The next thing is to develop relationships with municipal shelters and highlight the need for community CAP programs. And I'll be interested to hear from you, because I have heard from other shelters as I've been doing this research that almost seems like, not now, we can't do it, we have other priorities. But I think it's important that we create buy-in from agencies that need these programs the most. I mean, that will lower the number of animals, the number of cats euthanized. But then the question is, how do we implement those things if there's no low-cost, spay neuter surgery services available? So again, complex, but definitely something I think that needs to happen. So I'm hoping that we will have subject matter experts come to the table with us so that we can establish regional plans, identify what they cost, and then start sharing that information with funders to illuminate what's happening in the state. And what I will say is that through the course of this work, I have been talking to other funders, some foundations, some individual philanthropists, and people are very, very interested in seeing a no-kill, for lack of a better term, Washington. That's something that they can really get behind, but again, I don't believe, and I'm sure you would all agree, that I am the person to essentially, formulate what the plans are. I need people who are in the business to step up and help. And then finally, to engage the community to create a no-kill Washington state. Hans and Cindy really are committed to this as a goal and as a movement, and obviously, I want to find a way that we can broadcast this to other people and get buy-in and engagement. And I'm really hoping that having this conversation with you is a way to start that conversation with, the Federation members. Okay, that's it.
Janine, thanks so much. That's awesome. I'm going to ask an elephant in the room question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Since the term no-kill isn't, embraced by everyone, and some agencies feel it can be, divisive or whatever, do you know if the trustees are interested in finding a term about this activity that would allow the Federation and other members to feel more comfortable and not have that be a barrier?
Yes. Well, I mean, I haven't spoken to them, but knowing them, I would say yes. When we first started doing the work, we automatically said, let's talk about a 90% live release rate for healthy and treatable animals, exactly for that reason. However, when we were just at the Best Friends conference, people were using the term no-kill in a way that kind of made sense. And what they were saying is that, yes, obviously, shelters are going to have to euthanize animals, the sick, the aggressive, whatever the case is. But if we're talking about healthy and treatable animals, then that is in fact killing them. And are we willing as a community to own that? And I'm not saying that I 100% agree or disagree. I'm just kind of sharing with you what the talk was at the conference. But I think if it was a matter of getting the Federation involved and it was about terminology, we can unequivocally work to figure that out. That's my sense.
All right, and thank you. I appreciate it. I know a couple people who weren't able to be on the call had kind of bantered about that a little bit, and I just thought it'd be important to, throw that question out there. I didn't know what the answer was going to be, so thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you did, Kate, because I'm in a similar boat. I mean, I sometimes use the term no-kill just as a shorthand, but it is a loaded term, and I recognize that. Does anybody have any questions?
I'm just looking at the messages from people.
Oh, I have it now. I can actually see it now.
Yeah, there we go. I was just wondering, at the August 4th presentation to our members,
Yeah.
maybe we should all be thinking about whether or not just an initial simple step would be to encourage the groups that are there to sign up on one of two sheets. Hey, I'm a shelter that's interested in receiving animals, meaning I accept transfers in, or hey, I need help, I want more partners, contact me. And maybe, you know, again, the Federation could start facilitating even more of that. We know what's going on in our industry, right? But it may be just something where the Federation, again, steps forward. And then this is just a separate aside. I was thinking to myself, you know how there's sister cities, you know, the concept of being a sister city? Maybe some of us on the west side should be thinking about who our sister counties should be. You know, do we start with Adams or, you know, whoever, right? And maybe that's one of the ways when the players get around the table to talk about solutions, that's one way to start tackling it is, you know, pick a county or maybe two and figure out how we're going to really focus on those areas and help create solutions. And again, if they feel like they have a real partner on the west side that's, you know, our partners, that could be, I think, very empowering. So anyways, I'm one of the people on the phone, so I'm going to stop talking for a moment and let everybody with their questions that are online.
Well, while people, I'm not sure if people actually have questions, but I want to ask a question. So when I say, you know, having a name, you know, whether it was no kill, 90% live release rate, whatever the case was, say that was easily settled. Would the Federation be interested in taking a leadership role in helping us achieve a 90% live release rate? And I'm not saying you can answer that question now, but I am saying I want to be very direct in saying I am interested in knowing about that.
This is Lori, and I think my input on that would be it's dependent on what would be required of us, because we are already a all-volunteer organization except for one paid administrative person, and so our capacity is fairly limited, I think, to take on additional tasks. Though I think that overall my take from all of the meetings that I attend is that really that is our commitment to advancing no-kill or animal welfare in general. And I think we'd all like to move towards that. And so if that could fall into part of the strategic planning that we're already undertaking as well, I think my answer, my particular take on it would be yes, but I also think it's capacity dependent.
Okay, no, and I appreciate that, Lori. I guess where I'm kind of going with this, and again, I mean, feel free to say no. It's just I want to make sure I understand. There really are situations where solutions are not at all easy. Like, you know, when I talk about the northeast part of the state, or let's say in Lewis County, you know, if we wanted them to implement community cat programs, but they don't have a shelter clinic, and nor do they really have any vets that would work with them, you know, this kind of stuff. There are nuances and operational concerns that I can't answer. And so, you know, we're really going to be looking for subject matter experts to help us kind of formulate some of these strategies and vet whether or not they're feasible. Is this something that we might be able to call upon the Federation? And again, I know we're just talking about this now and it's not, you know, in stone, but I want to take your temperature to see if it seems like something you might be interested in.
Well, this is Kay. I think Lori's right. I mean, I think that there is a lot of enthusiasm about it and a lot of interest, and we just want to be realistic about our bandwidth and our capacity, and then of course the funding aspect of it, and what could we do. But I mean, I personally feel super excited about how the Federation could become more involved in this arena, and again, I think there's just a lot of really simple things we could do, and then there could be broader, genuine leadership activity.
Thanks, Kay. Does anybody else want to chime in?
Janine, this is Lori again, and then I will.
She is putting in messages on the chat board.
No, Mike. Yeah, I see her. Okay, Sarah, you know what? We don't have to talk about it now, but I'm wondering if maybe I would love to kind of schedule a phone call with you, because I'm really looking at the work that you're doing in your community, and I see so many ways in which I'd love to have it replicated. Okay, great. Thanks. Let's do it. Love it. Thank you. Let me ask you guys another question, and it won't hurt my feelings. Did you find, like, is this the kind of information that you're looking for? Were you, I don't know, because we didn't really talk about what to expect, but I'm just curious if it helps you in any way, or are you looking for other things that we could provide?
This is Lori, and one of the things that I think that would be helpful, and it's possible that I missed it because I'm at work still, and so I'm joining from work, and I was a little bit late from another meeting commitment, but something that I think is impactful on overall statistics and euthanasia is legislation. And I know that you and I have talked about that previously, Janine, but also if there's themes within the kill rates of those differing counties that are tied to legislation, I think that because that may be a area of concentration for us.
That's a great point.
Yeah, this is Kay. I would absolutely love, and I'm sure Laura Clark would feel the same way, as co-chairs of the Ledge Committee, if there's any knowledge about that and correlation that we could then consider in our matrix of, what legislation to focus on, absolutely. And I had us join our meeting is Pause Shelter Operations Manager Lisa Hawkins, and Janine, she had a response to your query.
Hey,
Oh,
Janine.
okay. Hi, Lisa.
Hi. I think my only question, I don't know if this would be possible, is if it was possible to get more details on the euthanasia rate. It would be really helpful to know the euthanasia of healthy adoptable cats versus feral community cats, because then to really see if it's also organizing more transfers in of adoptables.
Lisa, that's a great question. Unfortunately, we use the Shelter Animals Count basic matrix, and so it doesn't use Asilomar definitions. It's just species and then age of species. But what happened is when I started to see low live release rates for cats, then I would have follow-up conversations with shelter staff, and so I can't give you the specific stats, but in most instances, in the municipal shelters and or humane societies without contracts that had high live release rates, high euthanasia rates for cats, I was told verbally the majority were community cats. So the short answer is no. The long
Right.
answer is, I think so.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, because that really helps with understanding what the focus might need to be. I also wanted to say that I think what was really interesting about some of the data is something that the executive committee occasionally struggles with when we're trying to make grant-making decisions, as far as understanding the landscape of, again, where the spay-neuter resources are versus where there really is high euthanasia. And I could see us using some of this data to help guide us for those times where we just don't have.
Really do have a lot of information, so I'll kind of go through it and see what I can share.
And I also want to say, I think what you explained as far as owner request to euthanasia and some of those other details, as well as some of the outlier factors, I think that'll be really helpful when you do the presentation on August 4th for our members, because it just really provides that additional context.
Right, right. While I have you guys on the phone, what about the idea of a technology solution for animal transport? Do you have any feelings about that?
Can you expand upon what you mean, Janine?
Yeah, so, kind of a centralized database where all of the available animals would be kind of listed by species and age, comprehensive, so that if you're Grays Harbor Paws and you have way too many cats, and you're Orcas Island pet protectors, and you don't have any cats anymore because you've actually eradicated, your TNR has been so successful, like no kittens are being born, and you need them. Those two organizations, they don't know each other. They're too small. So there would be a centralized place where you could go and kind of query inventory to either receive animals or send animals. I just don't know necessarily that it would be widely used by enough organizations to warrant the money it would cost to create. And so want your feedback.
Janine, I can actually speak to this as Gloria again. We've actually had something of this nature in place in several different iterations in the past, and it petered out. It was never used. The people didn't seem to either respond to the request for help or put their hands up. It really, to me, has seemed that the best way to enact those transfers between organizations is it's all about dependent on relationships. And so, and I've been a member of a small organization that accepts dogs from all over the state. And really, it's developing those key relationships with the people in those different organizations, and then reaching out to them. And so I think the thing that would be more helpful is for us to put together a database of people who, what type of pets they accept, and for example, here's Bullseye and we accept pit bulls, and here's some of the criteria that we look for, and some, in that way, for another organization that's looking to transfer out a pit bull, they can look at that and say, okay, here's the people I can contact, and then I can contact them and see if they have room. The contact person that they should be reaching out to, and vice versa. So as a rescue organization, if I know I have an opening and I have a foster open, I can send out an email to all contacts on that list and say, hey, by the way, we have an open foster home. Do you have any pit bulls that you want to put into foster? Because people change within organizations, and so I found that the institutional knowledge goes away with those people that are the key contacts for transfers.
Yeah, Lori, yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that I'm going to have to do some navigating around this, because the trustees see this as a very kind of viable solution to certain transfer-related issues, but I've heard similar things from other organizations. So I'm glad at least, you shared your feedback. And if anybody else, and Glynis, I see you feel the same, so that's good to know. Oh, and Sarah too. Okay. Yes, Sarah, I agree with that about seeing Washington shelters prioritizing transfers. And what's interesting, and you guys should tell me if you disagree with this. I think what happens sometimes is that we don't always know what animals are available in the state. So I keep going back to this gentleman in Okanogan County. Last year he transferred, 810 dogs. I think 60% of them were puppies. And he just gave me his stats this morning. I think as of this date for this year, he's transferred like 425 dogs, and he's got a mom hound now pregnant with puppies. So it's partially knowing where to go to get the dogs, and I find that the rescues don't always know how to reach out. So I've been trying to do this backdoor kind of connection so that people can access his dogs. Same with cats.
This is Kay. I liked Sarah's comment about like a listserv. It feels like the math was really big and onerous, and since we're just talking about the state, it's more of like, and like Lori was saying, making sure there is a contact for the agency, and again, that if in general they are receiving or a transfer out, and basically what they'll take and what they won't. And then it does get down to the relationships of then like, oh, okay, well, we can take this kind of dog, but then our kennels really aren't good for that kind of dog. Or, oh, if we get a pregnant animal, we do spay them, whereas this group might go ahead and let the animal have, the litter, and, the sending agency might have a feeling about that. It starts to become those details. But sometimes just even having that initial connection can be challenging. We know there's times we've gotten calls like from Okanogan where they say, we need help, and then we reach out, and we never hear from them. And which obviously is just like a resource thing on their end, but then you feel a little, you feel kind of stuck about what can you do next. And I think that is also where some of the solution is missing.
Yeah. And then I wanted to ask you guys something else. Now I'm forgetting. Have you heard of Target Zero?
Yes.
Yes. It's interesting because, we're going to have a conversation with them to talk about a couple of communities, specifically Tri-Cities. I mean, obviously, you need to have buy-in from the agencies and also even the kind of like city council to really utilize their services. But I want to just kind of get a take on what bringing in an outside consultant to make a difference would actually look like. I have no idea what that cost would be. And obviously, it's very much out of my realm of expertise. But we may wind up doing that to really keep pushing, to get those communities that are struggling. Okay, my last question, because I know time is of the essence. How do you all feel, this is a loaded question, about community CAT programs, return to field specifically?
I'm sorry, can you state the question again? I think I missed it.
I wanted to know how the folks on the phone felt about community CAT programs, specifically return to field.
I personally have seen it and worked towards its effort in Pierce County before I left Northwest Spay Neuter. And I think it's an incredible program. And I think that once it was enacted, there's been a lot less blowback from animal control than they initially thought. There's a lot of animal control officers that were very against it in the beginning, and now they've become really big proponents of it after they've seen it enacted. And really, one of the big concerns they had was increasing calls from their constituents saying that the problem is not getting cleared up. And I guess my understanding is from talking to the people that are doing the program now that it's actually not come to fruition for them, that the calls have decreased because the animals are getting spayed and neutered. And as we all know it to be true, that behavior that goes along with the reproduction has declined. And so they are seeing less calls more rather than more. So I think that Pierce County has enacted it in a pretty successful way, and it's continuing to grow every year.
Thank you. Okay, well, if nobody has any other questions, then, Kay, you know what I might do? I'll shoot you an email just to make sure, because I didn't think I would do as long of a presentation for the members, so I just don't want to kind of like wrap my head around what you think would be most beneficial. So I'll shoot you an email about that.
Janine, do you mind shooting that to Cora and Jean Mueller?
Yeah.
We're gonna. They're helping with that aspect of the meeting. Because I'm working on strategic planning stuff, so that'd be great. You'll be your collaborators on that.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to let you know what we've been doing and what we found out.
Awesome. Thanks, Janine. We look forward to August 4th. That'll be awesome.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Janine.
Bye.